Hi there, it's Matt here, and welcome back to the podcast. See if this feels familiar. It's 20 to 2 in the morning. You've been awake since 6 the previous day, and now you're lying perfectly still in a dark room. Your body is heavy. Your legs ache with the particular ache of a day that asked too much of them. By every honest measure, you are exhausted, and you cannot sleep. Not because you aren't tired, you are profoundly tired. It's that somewhere behind your eyes, a voice is working through tomorrow's calendar and last week's argument, and a sentence you wish you'd phrased differently in 2009. The body wants to shut down, but the mind has other plans. Most of us have spent a night in that bed. We have a name for it now, tired but wired. And it is one of those everyday phrases that turns out to be doing real scientific work without knowing it. Because the strange, almost contradictory thing you feel in that bed is not a contradiction at all. It is two different systems pulling in two different directions. And once you can see what they are, the whole experience stops being a personal failing and starts being something far more useful, a pattern, a well-studied, well-understood, and, this is the part that matters most, a changeable one. Here is the first idea to let go of, because it is the one that keeps people stuck. Sleeplessness in this situation is not a fuel problem. Picture two separate instruments on a dashboard. One is the fuel gauge, how depleted you are, how much pressure for sleep has built up across your waking day. The other is the accelerator, how activated your system is right now in this moment. You can be running on empty and still have your foot flat to the floor. That is tired but wired. The fuel gauge reads 0. The engine is racing anyway. This is not a picture the science is reaching for after the fact. The dominant scientific model of insomnia, the one that has held up across decades of laboratory work, does not describe it as a shortage of sleepability or a shortage of sleep need. It describes it as a disorder of hyperactivation, a state of heightened activation running across the body, the brain, and the emotional system, and running not just at night, but around the clock. The trouble is not that the sleep system is too weak. It is that the alerting system is too strong. You are not failing to fall asleep. You are succeeding rather too well at staying awake. And notice the phrase that keeps surfacing there, around the clock. This is the detail that surprises people most. The overactivation behind tired but wired is not only a bedtime event that flicks on at lights out and off again at dawn. In the laboratory, it shows up as something closer to a trait that runs right through the day. A system idling high in the morning, idling high in the afternoon, and therefore already revving by the time night comes, and you finally ask it to be still, which reframes the whole bedtime struggle. You are not falling at the last hurdle of an otherwise calm day. You are meeting at midnight an alertness that has quietly been with you since breakfast. And that overactive alerting system runs on two separate channels, which matters enormously because the two need different handling. When researchers set out to measure pre-sleep activation properly, they built a simple 16-item questionnaire and they split it cleanly down the middle. 8 items for the mind, racing thoughts, an inability to switch off, the day replaying on a loop. 8 items for the body, a heart that won't slow, muscles that won't unclench, a stomach pulled tight. 2 channels, the racing mind and the racing body. They can run together, but they are not the same wire, and they are very far from equally to blame. When you ask people which channel is actually keeping them awake, the answer is lopsided. Survey nearly 300 people with long-standing insomnia, people whose nights routinely open with an hour and a half of lying there, and ask them what is doing it. The racing mind is named roughly 10 times more often than the racing body. And when you line the two channels up against how long people genuinely take to fall asleep, it is the mind channel that tracks it most closely. The body is often just along for the ride. The driver at the threshold of sleep is almost always the mind. One quick distinction before we go on, because these things get muddled together. This is not the experience of sleeping a whole night and waking up feeling as though you had been run over. That is a different problem for a different day. And it is not the experience of choosing to stay up, scrolling, pushing bedtime back. That is a decision. Tired but wired is the opposite of a decision. It is wanting sleep badly and being unable to get into it. The wanting is there. The door simply will not open.
A partner of today's podcast is an alternative to coffee that I've been using myself. As I think I probably mentioned on this podcast before, I am one of the individuals who is quite sensitive to caffeine based on my genetics, but I still like a similar beverage jumpstart to each day, and I do get sort of sleep inertia, and it's nice to have something that can lift you out of that, but without the jitters or all of that caffeine crash that some people may experience. That is where the supporter of today's podcast comes in, Mud Water, and it is spelled MUDWTR, so Mud Water. It is a popular coffee alternative, and Mud Water will blend cacao with varied mushrooms, and it has only a fraction of the caffeine of a cup of coffee, but it provides this, it's a really interesting, just sort of natural lift is the best way I can describe it. It's very pleasant, and it has been working a treat for me. It also has all of the things that you want. It is 100% USDA certified organic. It is non-GMO, gluten-free, vegan, and kosher. If you would like to get a free offer, most people do, you can get a free frother, and that's one of those implements that you put in and it creates that lovely sort of froth on the top of your drink. And you can get some free samples of the coconut creamer. You can just go on over to Mud Water, that is MUDWTR.com/Matt Walker. You will get the freebies. So again, that is MUDWTR.com/Matt Walker, and you will get your free frother and your free coconut creamer. Okay, let's get back to the show.
I said the mind is usually the driver, but I do not want you to think the body is only imagining its part, because it is not. And the evidence for that is some of my favorite in this whole field. Picture a car parked on the drive, nobody touching the pedal, and yet the rev counter is sitting far higher than it has any business sitting. That is what the body of a chronically wired sleeper looks like from the inside. Take 10 poor sleepers and 10 matched good sleepers, settle them in a laboratory for 36 hours, and simply measure how much oxygen their bodies burn. A direct readout of metabolic rate, of how hard the engine is idling. The poor sleepers burned more, not only at night, at every single measurement point, across the entire day and night. And the gap held even when the brief moments of being awake were stripped out. The engine was running hot around the clock. The body's stress machinery tells the same story, and the timing of it is the thing to notice. There is a hormonal system that governs your stress response, and in a calm, well-regulated body, it should be winding down as the evening arrives, the way you pull the shutters down on a shop at the end of trading. Take 11 young people with insomnia and 13 matched good sleepers and follow their stress hormones across a full 24 hours. The insomnia group ran higher overall, but the gap opened widest in one particular window, the evening and the first half of the night. Exactly when the shutters should have been coming down, their system was pushing them back up. The body was being told to stay on alert at the precise hour it most wanted to rest. And then there is the brain itself, which explains one of the eeriest parts of the whole experience. You know the feeling. You would swear you barely slept, that you lay there awake for half the night. And yet by every external measure, you clearly did sleep. Here is why. Think of a laptop you have told to go to sleep. The screen goes dark, but rest your hand near it and the fan is still spinning, still quietly processing in the background. Something similar happens at the edge of sleep in a wired brain. The fast, high-frequency electrical activity that goes with active thinking stays switched on right through the wake-to-sleep transition when it ought to be fading away. The brain slips into sleep with the thinking machinery still humming, which is exactly why it can feel so convincingly as though you never slipped under at all. Step back and look at the three findings together. The body burning more fuel, the stress hormones surging at the wrong hour, the thinking circuits left running at the threshold of sleep. Three different instruments aimed at three different parts of you, and all three giving the same reading. This is the part I find genuinely reassuring, oddly enough. If you have ever lain there convinced your own body was betraying you for no reason, the evidence says you were half right. The body really was wired. There really was a reason. And a thing with a reason behind it is a thing you can begin to work with. So why won't the mind let go? The most compelling explanation turns the whole problem into a loop. And like most loops, it feeds itself. It runs like this. You begin to worry about sleep and about what a poor night will do to tomorrow. That worry makes you watchful. You start scanning for signs that sleep is not coming, checking the clock, noticing how awake you feel, monitoring your own failure to drift off. And here is the trap. Watching for sleep is itself a state of alertness. It is the precise opposite of the letting go that sleep asks for. The more carefully you monitor the runway, the longer you keep the plane circling. Worry about sleep does not merely accompany the wakefulness, it manufactures it. There is a second turn of the screw here, and it links straight back to that humming brain. People caught in this loop tend to misjudge their own nights, overestimating how long they lay awake, underestimating how much they actually slept. Remember the brain that crosses into sleep with the thinking machinery still on. It leaves you feeling as though you were awake through stretches you were, in fact, asleep for. So the morning verdict, "I barely slept," is often harsher than the truth of it. And that harsh verdict becomes the next night's worry, which becomes the next night's overactivation. The loop does not only keep you awake, it quietly rewrites the record of the night in precisely the direction most likely to keep the worry fed. It is also worth being precise about what the racing mind even is, because part of why "just stop overthinking" is such useless advice is that it bundles two different things into one. The research pulls them apart. There is worry, the anxious forward-leaning churn about what might happen. And there is rumination, the backward-looking grinding over of what already has. In people with insomnia, these turn out to be genuinely distinct mental habits, not one undifferentiated fog. That distinction is not hair-splitting. It is the reason a single blunt instruction to clear your mind fails so reliably. There is not one mind to clear. There are at least two different engines running, and they do not answer to the same off switch. Which brings us to the trickiest mechanism of all, and the one I most want you to hold on to, because it is the key to everything in the second half of this episode. Sleep is an automatic process. It belongs to the same family as digestion or balance or the swallow reflex, things the body does beautifully right up until the moment you try to do them on purpose. Think of walking down a familiar staircase, effortless, until you start consciously placing each foot, at which point you very nearly trip. Falling asleep is exactly like that. The harder you attend to it, the more explicitly you intend it, the more effort you pour into making it happen, the further it retreats. We touched on this previously in the insomnia episode, that forcing sleep backfires. Here is the machinery underneath it. You cannot will yourself into an automatic process. The trying is the very thing that jams the gears. So, what does the evidence point to? If the problem is an overactivated system and a mind that cannot stop watching itself, then the tools that earn their keep all share a single, slightly counterintuitive logic. None of them tries to switch the mind off. You cannot switch a mind off. That is the trying too hard trap all over again. What they do instead is give the mind something else to hold. something gentle enough not to wake you further, but absorbing enough to crowd out the worry. The goal is not silence. The goal is to get the mind off itself. Let me start with the family of tools that go straight at the racing mind, because that, remember, is the driver. The most elegant of them has a slightly absurd name, the cognitive shuffle. And it comes from a cognitive scientist who reverse engineered something your brain already does for free. Think about what happens in the last minute or two before you fall asleep on a good night. Your thoughts go strange. They drift, they fragment. A teaspoon becomes a beach, becomes a half-remembered song with no thread connecting them. That loosening, that incoherence is not a side effect of falling asleep. It may be part of the on-ramp. So the technique simply asks you to fake it. Pick a neutral word, say blanket, and for each letter, picture unrelated objects, one after another, lingering on none. B, a balloon, a barn, a bicycle. L, a lemon, a lighthouse. The images must stay disconnected because the moment they form a story, your planning mind wakes back up and starts steering. When this was tested against a standard approach in a trial of more than 150 people, the imagery group reported falling asleep more easily and a measurable drop in pre-sleep mental activation. And notice what it is really doing. It occupies the very working memory machinery that worry needs in order to run. You cannot rehearse tomorrow's meeting and imagine a lighthouse at the same time. There isn't room. This, by the way, is the honest mechanism behind the sleep stories that now come built into half the apps on your phone, and behind the oldest sleep aid in human history, the bedtime story told to a child. A good one is not a thriller. It is deliberately low on plot, soft on incident, full of meandering, gentle description that wanders nowhere in particular. That is not a failure of storytelling. That is the entire point. It is a cognitive shuffle someone else is doing the work of, leading your attention by the hand through a series of mild, disconnected images so your own mind doesn't reach for the worry instead. If the story had a cliffhanger, it would keep you up. The blandness is the medicine. A close cousin of the shuffle is plain imagery distraction. And it comes with one of my favorite findings because it is so specific about why generic advice fails. When researchers asked people lying awake to deliberately conjure a pleasant, absorbing scene, a beach, a walk through a wood, somewhere richly detailed, those people fell asleep faster and rated their worry as quieter than people simply told to distract themselves however they liked. That last detail is the one to hold on to. Distract yourself did not work nearly as well as a specific, engaging sensory scene. Vagueness leaves a gap, and worry pours straight into the gap. The mind needs something concrete enough to actually grip. So if you are going to send your attention somewhere, send it somewhere with texture, the smell of the place, the temperature of the air, the sound underfoot. Not a vague instruction to think of something nice. A long-standing partner of today's podcast is Element, spelled L-M-N-T. Element is a sugar-free electrolyte drink mix, and for me, it was the sugar-free part that made me start using it a while back. And again, I buy my own supply just to stay objective. Beyond having the electrolytes in the right balance, the other reason I'm a fan of Element is that it's scientific. If you look up the people who created the company, you'll find some pretty heavy-hitting physiology, biochemistry, and pharmacology knowledge baked into the product. And again, all of that comes without any sugar. Now, here's the update. Element's lemonade salt flavor, which used to be seasonal, was so popular that it's now permanent. You can get it year-round. Happily, I badgered them, and they have agreed to give you fine folks a free 8-count sample pack with any purchase of Element if you use the link drinklmnt.com/Matt Walker. So for free product with your purchase, just visit drinklmnt.com/Matt Walker. And as I said, you'll get some free product. Now, those tools all reach for the mind through the mind. but you can also come at the overactivation from the bottom up through the body. And the single best evidence doorway there is your own breath. There is a particular pace, somewhere around 6 breaths a minute, a slow inhale, a slightly longer exhale, at which something rather beautiful happens in your physiology. Your heart rate and your breathing fall into step. The braking branch of your nervous system, the part that governs rest, comes forward, and your whole system begins measurably to stand down. The long exhale is the active ingredient. It is on the out-breath that the brake is applied. You do not need a gadget, though plenty exist. You need only to lengthen the exhale and slow the whole cycle down and let the body's own machinery do the rest. And then there is the oldest somatic tool in the clinical book, progressive muscle relaxation. The slow tour through the body, tensing each muscle group for a few seconds and then releasing, working from the feet upward. It sounds almost too simple to matter. It is not. Pool together more than 30 randomized trials, and the effect on sleep quality is large and consistent. Part of the benefit is the obvious one. A clenched muscle is a small, constant signal of alarm, and unclenching it deliberately turns that signal off. But notice the quieter thing it is also doing. To track the sensation of your own calf releasing, you have to put your attention there, in the body, in this moment. And attention spent on a relaxing calf is attention not spent on tomorrow's calendar. It is a body scan and a distraction in one. The same is true of the body scan style of meditation, where instead of tensing, you simply move attention slowly through the body, part by part, noticing without judging. Both anchor a wandering mind to something neutral and present. Which brings us to mindfulness meditation, the most studied of all of them, and the one most often misunderstood. People assume meditation is about emptying the mind. It is very nearly the opposite. It is the practice of noticing that your attention has wandered off, to the argument, the calendar, the 2009 sentence, and gently walking it back again and again without scolding yourself for the wandering. And you can see why that would be the precise antidote to the loop we built earlier. The insomnia loop is fueled by watching yourself fail and getting frustrated. Mindfulness trains the exact opposite reflex. Notice, allow, return. No frustration. In one carefully run trial, older adults with real sleep trouble were split between a mindfulness course and a solid class in standard sleep advice. The meditation group improved more, not just in how they slept, but in the daytime fatigue and low mood that poor sleep drags behind it. It is not a bedtime trick so much as a daytime skill that happens to pay out at night, which fits everything we said about a system that runs hot around the clock. You are turning the whole engine's idle down, not just flicking a switch at lights out. Now, one essential caveat that ties this whole section together, because it is the difference between these tools working and backfiring. Do not deploy any of them as a weapon against wakefulness. The moment the cognitive shuffle becomes, I am doing this so that I will fall asleep, why am I not asleep yet? You have smuggled the effort and the self-watching right back in, and you are back in the trap. The right spirit is almost careless. You are not using the beach scene to fall asleep. You are just spending some pleasant time on a beach, and sleep is welcome to arrive whenever it likes. Hold the technique loosely. Its job is to occupy the mind, not to force the door. Sleep, remember, is the automatic process you cannot command. And all you are really doing with any of these is getting out of its way. There is also the matter of the bed itself, which sits underneath all of this. My friend and colleague Michael Granner has a wonderful way of putting it. Think about a dentist's chair. The very first time you sit in one, it carries no particular dread. It is just a chair. But sit in it enough times and live through what tends to happen there, and something changes. Eventually you are tense before you have even arrived in the waiting room, in the car, on the way. You are reacting to an event that has not happened yet because the association has been so thoroughly learned that the dread now runs ahead of the cause. And the very same thing can happen with your bed. The first time you lie there wide awake, it means nothing. But night after night of lying there awake frustrated, reading the ceiling, and the bed quietly stops being a cue for sleep and becomes a cue for being awake, the place where, as far as your brain is now concerned, you do your lying awake. The dread runs ahead of the night. And that is the association you have to break. The single most directly relevant behavioral tool in the entire field is the one that breaks that link. And it is almost provocatively simple. Go to bed only when you are genuinely sleepy. And if sleep does not come, get up, leave the bedroom, and return only when it does. It feels like the opposite of what you ought to do. Surely staying put gives sleep more chances to arrive. But that is the fuel gauge thinking again. Lying there awake does not bank sleep. It only deepens the association between this bed and this wakefulness. Getting up, paradoxically, is how you protect the bed. Pool together 11 randomized trials of this approach, and the effect on how quickly people fall asleep is large. As good as any other psychological tool we have for getting to sleep in the first place. It pairs naturally with everything above. The breath, the shuffle, the imagery are all things you can do in the chair you have got up to sit in until the sleepiness returns and earns you your way back to bed. And one more tool that goes after the racing mind by timing, not technique. Most people do their worrying in bed because it is the first quiet moment they have had all day, which is rather like leaving the shop's accounts until after you have locked up and switched off the lights, then trying to do the books in the dark. What the evidence supports is moving that work earlier and out of the bedroom entirely. Set aside a slot in the early evening, well before bed, and put the day to bed on paper. Write down what is on your mind, the worries, the loose ends, and beside each one, the next small step. In people with insomnia, this kind of structured, scheduled problem solving has been shown to lower the very thing we have been circling all episode pre-sleep mental activation. You are not trying to solve your whole life at the kitchen table. You are telling the mind the books are already done, so it has no reason to reach for the ledger at midnight. None of these is a folk remedy. They are working parts of a larger formal treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, usually shortened to CBT-I, which sits at the very top of the evidence for chronic insomnia, ahead of sleeping pills, as the first thing the guidelines point to. So here is the whole thing, pulled into a single idea. Tired but wired is not a sign that your sleep is broken, and it is not a shortage of tiredness. It is an alerting system that has been left switched on in the body's idling engine, in the stress hormones that surge at the wrong hour, in the electrical hum of the brain, and most of all, in a mind that has learned to stay watchful at exactly the time it should be standing down. You are not bad at sleeping. You are, for the moment, very good at staying alert. And alertness, unlike something broken, is the kind of thing that can be turned down. None of this flips a switch overnight. A system that took months to wind up does not unwind in a single good evening. And anyone who promises otherwise is selling something. But the direction is dependable, and the levers are real. The science here is genuinely on your side. It has taken what can feel like the most maddening and lonely experience, lying there exhausted in the dark while the mind runs its laps, and shown it to be a recognizable pattern with recognizable levers you can lean on. That is a quietly hopeful thing. It would be rather a shame not to use it. Thanks so much for listening. I really do appreciate you tuning in. Please take care of yourself, enjoy your waking days, and sleep a sound sleep this night. Bye for now.